You go through all this, you go through those words, it's been pretty hectic week to do this. And unfortunately, it's gonna take attention where you are. By the time you get a call, they're gone and you just keep some more, you know.
Co-host, and any co-host would have the same.
It is. Yeah, especially if it's cold. It's cold, it's not as bad. Now that, I think I've got 2 o'clock. Are y'all ready to go? There's Russell right there. Let's send him a text to clean that desk.
He'll probably tell you to come help me.
I'll be saying, this farmer says clean that. Yeah, he's a good manager. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the meeting to order. My name is Gary Middleton. I serve as Secretary of the Executive Committee, so I'll be conducting the meeting this afternoon since I'm the only Executive Committee member here. My turn in the barrel. Looks like we've got about almost 15 members joining us via teleconference.
Steve, it seems someone muted the mobile room kit.
Can I hear Tim Andrus present?
I'm present.
Thank you. Amber Beer. John Byram.
Here.
Thank you. Kurt Campbell.
Here.
Thank you. Ray Chavez. Will Conley. Debbie Farmer.
Here.
Thank you. Charlie Flatten.
Here.
Thank you. Steve Graham.
Here.
Thank you. Vic Hildebrand. Tom Youngman.
Here.
Thank you. Russell Lavis.
Here.
Thank you. Glenn Lord.
Here.
Thank you. Daniel Meyer. Gary Middleton.
Here.
Thank you. Travis Prusky.
He's waiting online, trying to get in.
Okay. Robert Puente.
Here.
Thank you. Vanessa Pugh Williams. Humberto Ramos.
Here.
Thank you. Weldon Riggs.
Here.
Thank you. Roland Ruiz. Diane Savage. Darren Simmons. Mitchell Sowards. Jonathan Stinson.
Here.
Thank you. Heather Sumter. Tom Taggart.
Here.
Thank you. Ian Taylor. Diane Wasnich.
Here.
Thank you. And Adam Yablonsky.
Yeah.
Thank you. Elizabeth McCoy. Ronald Kiesler. Ileana Delgado. Don McGee. Marty Kelly.
Here.
Charles Wiedenfield. Jamie McCool. Carl Kroll. And Rusty Ray. Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay.
This is Doris Cooksey. I joined just a little bit late.
Thank you, Doris.
Okay, for the recording, they didn't have the tape recorder going, so I will start off again by welcoming everyone to today's South Central Texas Regional Water Plan Group, Region L. As a sole member of the Executive Committee, I'll be chairing the meeting today. My name is Gary Middleton, and I think that should do it for the record. Okay, public comment, did we receive anything?
No, sir.
No,
Okay.
sir.
We'll move along to agenda item number 3, approval of the minutes for the previous meeting. I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any objections? Then they stand approved as distributed. All right, status report from the Water Development Board, Elizabeth.
Alrighty, good afternoon. Did you want me to share my screen to show the slides, or were you guys gonna flip through those in the presentation?
We'll flip through 'em.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so next slide, please. Thank you. So we'll start with an update on the regional water planning rulemaking. In December, TWDB board approved publishing the proposed revisions to 31 Texas Administrative Code chapters 357 and 358. The proposed rules were then published in the Texas Register for a 30-day public comment period, which closed on January the 31st. So we are taking a look at the comments that we received, and we'll be considering those. We anticipate presenting the final rules to the TWDB board for consideration this spring. The rulemaking documents are available online at the link that's provided. And just kind of at a high level, want to go over what some of the proposed revisions include. The revisions are kind of to incorporate recommendations from the Interregional Planning Council, as well as some preliminary input that we received from stakeholders and legislative changes from House Bill 1905. So the proposed revisions include clarification that planning groups may plan for drought conditions worse than the drought of record. They would add a requirement for planning groups to document their interregional coordination efforts in the planning contract deliverables, like the technical memorandum, the initially prepared plan, and then the final plan. It implements the legislative changes from House Bill 1905, so that removed the infrastructure financing report and the project prioritization. There were, some revisions to reduce certain non-statutory reporting requirements in the plan, the addition of an errata process that would allow planning groups to make minor corrections to an adopted regional water plan prior to the adoption of the state water plan. And then some general kind of cleanup to the rules to update some references to old planning cycles and things like that. So you can find all the proposed changes in the rule proposal that's on our website. And then next up, in January, we released the draft livestock, manufacturing, and steam electric demand projections for the 2026 regional water plans. That projections data and some supplemental information was emailed out to all the planning group members and it's available on our website. Katie Dahlberg, who is the TWDB Projections and Socioeconomic Analysis Manager, has prepared a recorded presentation for you guys today on the non-municipal water demand projection methodologies. And her presentation will also cover the projections release schedule as well as resources that are available on our website to facilitate planning group review of the projections data. Next slide, please. And then finally, I just want to let you know we anticipate an amendment to the regional water planning grant contracts to occur this summer. The amendment will incorporate the full contract amount for the 6th planning cycle, the full scope of work, as well as updated contract and guidance documents. And we'll have a more detailed timeline on the contract amendments this spring. But that's all the updates that I have for you. Are there any questions? All right, thanks.
This is Tim Andrus. Did you want to make a comment regarding the new office that was created, the Office of Planning?
Sure. So we just, I think at the beginning of the month, are having a little bit of a reorg. And currently the TWDB had, or previously, regional water planning and flood planning were housed under the Water Supply and Infrastructure Office. Those two groups are now being kind of reorganized into a separate office that will be called the Office of Planning, and that is going to be headed by Matt Nelson.
Thank you.
Okay, Tim was going to give a report on the interlocal interaction we have with our surrounding planning regions, and so I haven't talked to him about it, so I have no comment on that. If someone else would like to say something about the liaisons that work with the other districts, they're welcome to. Also under this item number 5, we had some vacancies that we solicited for this past quarter for on the board representing water utilities and electric generation. We had no applicants, so the Sarah will go out and re-solicit for those positions one more time this coming spring. Anything else under item 5?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
It's water utilities, and what was the other category?
Electric generation.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 6, where the Water Development Board will do a presentation on the requirements for the planning group members to satisfy the legislature. Elizabeth?
Yes. Next slide, please. And actually, I think maybe one more. All right, so we received a request for a refresher presentation on the planning group voting member roles and responsibilities. So I've prepared a few slides for you today on that topic. And next slide. All right, to get started, membership in the planning groups is diverse as required by law from the Texas Water Code and TWDB agency rules. There are 12 required interests that on each planning group that must serve as voting members. So, and these are listed here on the slide. Planning groups must have at least one representative of each interest category serving as voting members. The exception to that is the groundwater management area's interests, which requires a single representative for each groundwater management area that's at least partially located within the planning area. So for Region L, there are 5 groundwater management areas that overlap with the Region L planning area. So Region L has 5 groundwater management area representatives, 1 for each GMA. TWDB rules provide a brief definition of the interest categories, and planning groups may add representatives for additional interest categories as they see fit. For example, some regions have added representatives for real estate, travel and tourism, economic development, and higher education. Next slide, please. So voting members take on this role as a voluntary position, and the role comes with certain responsibilities. The most basic of which is to attend planning group meetings and represent their interest category. It's not just representing their own operation or who they work for. Planning group members also represent their entire region in the planning process. Voting members should become familiar with and follow the bylaws of their respective planning groups. Voting members are required to complete the Office of the Attorney General's Open Meetings Act and Public Information Act trainings. Members should be informed on the regional water planning rules and guidelines, as well as topics on which the voting members are asked to make decisions. Members should actively participate in and contribute supporting information to the development of the regional water plan, taking into consideration the needs of all interests in the region. Next slide. Some additional responsibilities include considering local plans when developing the regional water plan, reviewing meeting materials in advance of meetings, participating in directing the work that the technical consultants perform on the planning group's behalf, reviewing and providing feedback on draft plan content, coordinating with other planning groups for data consistency, opportunities for shared water management strategies and projects, and to avoid conflicts where possible. And finally, voting members are responsible for ensuring adoption of a regional water plan by the statutory deadline that meets all of the requirements. Next slide. So this slide lists some of the main TWDB web pages where you can find more information. The Regional Water Planning main page has links to many different resources, including educational information, frequently asked questions, water planning rules and statutes, and the 2021 regional water plans and previous plans. The new member webpage has a welcome letter for new planning group members, a new member resource guide, and these documents are currently being updated for the 6th cycle, and we will be sharing those updated documents with you once they're available. The 6th cycle planning documents webpage is where you can find the planning documents for this current cycle. It includes TWDB communications, project documents like the working schedule, as well as the planning grant contract documents and guidance. So if you're interested in more information, I'd invite you to take a look at what we have available on our website, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or need assistance navigating any of these resources. Next slide. That wraps up kind of the information that I have prepared for you. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks.
All right, agenda item number 7 is a presentation by the TWBD on the non-municipal projections, methodologies for the 2026 regional water plan. This is a recorded presentation, I think.
Next slide.
Good afternoon. My name is Katie Dahlberg. I'm the manager of the Projections and Socioeconomic Analysis Department in the Water Supply Planning Division at the Texas Water Development Board. Today I will be presenting on the non-municipal projections methodologies used in the 2026 regional water plans. I will first cover the projections process and our data release schedule, and then I will move into the non-municipal water demand projections methodologies. A friendly reminder of the projections process. TWDB drafts projections using statewide methodologies, and we share the data with the regional water planning groups, who then review and submit revision requests using Exhibit C as guidance. TWDB reviews the revision requests and we worked closely together with the Regional Water Planning Group to develop a final set of projections. Then the TWDB will present the projections to the board. Once the board adopts the projections, any changes thereafter go through an amendment process. We released the livestock, manufacturing, and steam electric power draft water demand projections and supporting data and methodology documents on January 20th. These were released via email and are also posted to our website, which I will demonstrate at the end of this presentation. In March, we plan to release the water user group list along with historical population, connections, net use, and GPCD data. And we are asking that regional water planning groups provide any feedback to the WUG list and the historical data by July. In August, we will release the irrigation and mining draft water demand projections. In February of 2023, we will release the population projections, plumbing code savings, and municipal water demand projections. We are asking that regional water planning groups submit all revision requests for non-municipal water demand projections by July 2023, and the very next month in August, submit revision requests for population and municipal water demand projections. This is a very tight timeline because we are on a census cycle where we are using the 2020 census data in our population projections. The U.S. Census Bureau was delayed in releasing the census data, and that has caused a delay in developing our population projections. So therefore, we are releasing our non-municipal projections early and are encouraging regional water planning groups to review those as soon as you can. Please feel free to ask me if you have any questions. And so that way we can meet the July and August 2023 deadlines. So for the non-municipal water demand projections methodologies in this plan, historical data will be based on 2015 to 2019 water use estimates. In this planning cycle, we are projecting for 2030 to 2080. For irrigation, we are using the same methodology as the 2021 regional water plan. The baseline is the 5-year average from 2015 to 2019. Water sources include groundwater, surface water, and reuse, and we will be using the most recent modeled available groundwater. 2030 through 2080 will be held constant, except in counties where groundwater availability is less than the groundwater portion of the demand projections. In those counties, the irrigation demands will decline at the same rate as the groundwater availability. The projections will be released in August of 2022. For livestock, we are using the same methodology as the 2021 regional water plan. The baseline is the 5-year average from 2015 to 2019. Historical water use is based on non-surveyed county water use estimates, which are developed annually using the U.S. Department of Agriculture's inventory estimates and water use per head per day coefficient. We survey aquaculture facilities through our water use survey, and these are added to the non-surveyed estimates. We carried over the same projection trends from the 2021 regional water plan. This plan projects through 2080, so we held our 2070 values constant to 2080. The draft projections were released on January 20th, and they're also available on the website. These are the water use coefficients that we use for each of the species that we estimate inventory for. In 2015, we updated the water use coefficients for dairy cattle, chickens, hogs, and goats. Those are highlighted here in this table. And these are what the draft livestock water demand projections look like in Region L. On this chart, we have historical 2010 through 2019 data in the black line. In the solid red line, we have the demand projections from the 2021 regional water plans, and the dotted green line is the draft projections for this new planning cycle. When looking at Region L, the main reasons for differences in the two sets of projections are the water use coefficient updates that started in 2015. Also, once every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture conducts an agricultural census which resets their annual inventory estimates. They did this in 2012 and 2017, and this has an impact on our water use estimate. And the last reason is that in 2015, TWDV changed the way that we estimate the number of chickens. We now use the U.S. Department of Agriculture's inventory estimates. This change in the water use coefficient and the chicken inventory estimates started in 2015, which is the beginning of our baseline. So 2015 to 2019, and this planning cycle is a lower baseline than we used in the last planning cycle, which was 2010 through 2014. For manufacturing, the baseline is the highest county level single year water use from 2015 to 2019, plus unaccounted for water use estimates. We survey large manufacturing facilities through our water use survey. And then using the U.S. Census Bureau's county business patterns historical number of manufacturing establishments, we can estimate water use for facilities we do not survey. Water sources include groundwater, surface water, and reuse. This is the total intake. We are not using the same projections methodology that we used in the previous plan. Because the first projected decade, 2030, is more than 10 years from the baseline water use data, we're applying the statewide annual historical water use rate of change from 2010 to 2019 to adjust the baseline value to the initial year of projections. This is to account for any potential changes in manufacturing production and water use that may occur between the baseline year and the first projected decade. To project 2040 through 2080, we applied the county business patterns, historical number of manufacturing establishments, statewide rate of change from 2010 to 2019 to account for future changes in water use, and we applied this linearly. So this is what the draft manufacturing projections look like in Region L. When looking at the Region L projections, you can see that 2015 through 2019 historical water use is generally higher than 2010 through 2014. We are seeing increasing water use trends from 2010 through 2019, particularly in Bexar and Calhoun counties. Another reason for the difference in the starting point for the projections. For Victoria County, we are using the whole intake in this planning cycle. And this accounted for about a 22,000 acre-foot difference. We are currently conducting a study in partnership with the U.S. Geological Survey and the University of Texas Bureau of Economic Geology to update the 2011 study BEG conducted. The home study will be a comprehensive and quantitative assessment of water use in Texas. Texas. It will develop historical water use estimates and demand projections for oil and gas, aggregates, and coal and lignite mining for counties in Texas. These projections will be used as the draft projections for the 2026 regional water plans and will be released in August of 2022. There is more information on our website regarding this study. For Steam Electric Power, the baseline is the highest county level single year water use from 2015 to 2019, plus estimated water use for facilities that do not respond to our survey, as well as any proposed facilities. We survey Steam Electric Power through our water use survey. We use the U.S. Energy Information Administration's 860 form and query for NAICS Code 22 to verify which facilities to survey. And then we can estimate water use for those that do not respond to our survey. We can also estimate water use for any proposed fossil fuel facilities. Using EIA's data, we can also confirm retired facilities. And if those facilities have stopped reporting on our water use survey, then we remove the water use from our projections. If a regional water planning group requested to remove a facility in the previous plan, then we also removed that facility from our draft projection. Region L did not request any facilities to be removed in the last planning cycle. Water sources include groundwater, surface water, and reuse. This is the consumptive use. 2030 through 2080 is held constant. We are using the same methodologies that we used in the 2021 Regional Water Plan. And this is what the draft projections look like in Region L compared to the last planning cycle. And as you can see, historical water use varies over time. To recap, these are the water sources included in each water demand category. Now I'm going to demonstrate how to view this data on our website. So from the TWDB's website, you can go to Water Planning, under Planning Data, Population and Water Demand Projections. Click on Draft Projections. We have a tab for each category that we have released data for thus far. Under each tab is a dashboard, and under each dashboard is the data available for download. So we have the projections, the methodology summary, historical supporting data, and any other supporting data. This is the livestock dashboard. We explain the methodology and how to use the dashboard. So to use the dashboard, click on Go to Dashboard. You can filter by region. You can zoom in on the map. We can see the data in tabular format and also in this chart. You can click on a county and you can view the data for that county. You can reset the filters to Texas. For manufacturing. Manufacturing also has a landing page. You can click Go to Dashboard. This is the data from our water use survey. You can filter the data by using this little funnel. So we'll look at Region L. You can see surface water, groundwater, and reuse, as well as total net use from 2010 through 2019 collected on our water use survey. You can also see the number of manufacturing facilities that we survey. By clicking this little facility icon, you can view all of the facility level data and total net use and their NAICS code. This data is also available for download in our historical supporting data for manufacturing Excel file. you click on this little projections icon, you can see the projections as well as historical data. You can filter by region. You can see here for Region L, you can see the historical data, the 2021 Regional Water Plan projections, and then also the draft projections in the 2026 Regional Water Plan. You can filter by county by clicking on the county and view how the data has changed. So we're talking about the increasing trends in Bexar County and increasing trends in Calhoun County. And in Victoria County, we're using the total intake. So it had a big difference in the water demand projections for Victoria County in this planning cycle. For steam electric power, you can click on the water use icon. You can see water use by county and water use over time. You can filter by region, and you can zoom in on the data in that region. If you click this little lightning bolt icon, it takes you to the facility level data. So filter by region, and you can see all of the facilities that we are tracking and the data that we are using to develop our draft projections. We have the water use survey number, the Energy Information Administration's plant information, the reporting status, water use over time, 2010 through 2019, if we estimated the water use, what that number is, and we also included a comment field for anything that we felt was significant about that plant. This data is also available for download in our historical supporting data for steam electric power Excel file. You click on the projections tab and filter by region. We include the 2030 demands in this table from both the 2021 Regional Water Plan and our draft projections. We only include 2030 because 2030 is held constant through the end of the planning horizon in both plans. We also included in this tab the U.S. Energy Information Administration's proposed facility capacity. We can see in Region L that there are wind facilities and natural gas facilities proposed in Region L. This is your contact information. You're welcome to contact me if you have any questions regarding the projections, methodologies, or the data release. You're also welcome to contact Elizabeth McCoy and she can put you in touch with me. Thank you for your time today.
All right, that concludes PWED's presentation on those projections. Apparently, for those who did not understand or could not hear, not real audible to all of us, go to the Texas Water Development Board webpage, website, and go to water planning, and under water planning, go through the down on the third column over from the left, population and water demand projections. I'm sure the methodology in this presentation will probably be there for you to refer back to. Thank you. That brings us up to item number 8, presentation, discussion, and appropriate action regarding the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group's guiding principles. Lauren will assist us in getting off into this.
Test. Test. Can you guys hear me? Can you people online hear me? Just need to be louder. Yes. Yes. Always yes. Okay. Chair Andrews asked me to put together a few slides about discussing the guiding principles. Since we're at the beginning of this 2026 regional water planning cycle, I thought that it would be helpful and potentially worthwhile for you all to consider revisiting these guiding principles to potentially update them with regards to some non-substantive topics. So the following presentation just provide a few examples or of where the planning group may choose to make revisions for the guiding principles. So there are two guiding principles, 1 and 11, and so this just provides an overview of the two guiding principles that non-substantive revisions may be helpful to revise, and it's mainly with addressing updates to references for, instead of the 5th cycle of planning, this is the 6th cycle of planning. Instead of the 2021 plan or the 2016 plan, it will now refer to as the 2026 plan. So if the planning group chooses to revisit the guiding principles in a more substantive way, it's definitely something that the planning group can choose to do. However, these are just non-substantive updates that I thought would be helpful to make if you all see fit. And the following slides go into a bit more detail about the specific red line strikeout showing inserted text and deleted text. So this shows updating the reference to the Texas Water Development Board's Exhibit C, which is now called the General Guidelines for Development of the 2026 Regional Plan. It was previously called the 5th Cycle of Regional Water Plan Development, Article 2, Population Water Demand Projections. So that one might be helpful to update. The next is principle number 11, and it's simply revising the title so that it's really aimed more at the enhancement of the 2026 Regional Water Plan as opposed to the previous plan from the 2021. It's also worth noting that these guiding principles, as I understand them, many of them were developed by subcommittees, including I think there was a subcommittee for this particular guiding principle regarding innovative strategies. There were some involving or minimum standards, and so that's a topic for discussion in the next agenda item. So if you all wanted to talk about how those sort of meet and go together, we definitely can. And this is really just meant to be a discussion, open discussion about how you guys, the planning group members, choose to move forward and develop this plan. Do you have thoughts?
Chairman Middleton, this is Tim Andrews. I'd like to just make a quick comment here. At previous meetings, we've asked the membership to identify any guiding principles that exist or should potentially exist for the purposes of developing a working group, if necessary, to consider those topics. I don't have any recollection of anyone identifying a need to revise or add to the guiding principles of the planning group. However, with these outdated references that exist in the present guiding principles, I believe it'd be appropriate to amend the guiding principles to update these references to a more time-appropriate reference. And frankly, the way it was proposed by Lauren, would be acceptable to me.
I'm assuming this is an action item we're gonna need to vote on, is that correct, Lauren?
As I understand it,
Okay.
it's a
My understanding is there was fairly major revisions in the last cycle to the guiding principles. I've looked at them, I'm comfortable with them, and I'm fine with just these minor edits as opposed to major revisions.
Anyone else?
I think the only comment I'd make, and I certainly have no objection to making these, revisions. I think they're sensible, they make sense, obviously, and it has to be current as far as the cycle we're working in. I think when we talked about this last time, I did bring up that we may have need, though, during this cycle to go back to guiding principles, depending upon what guidance we get from the Water Development Board in relation to some of the rules and things that they're currently working on promulgating. I just want to make sure that we have the understanding that, the fact that we revise these at this point in time, if that's the decision of the group, doesn't preclude us from taking another look if that's required, because we see changes between now and when we're engaged in some of the specifics of this cycle.
Valid point.
And it's also worth noting that the guiding principles were really born out of receiving many comments on the previous regional water plan. And the guiding principles were developed in order to, in a way, address many of those comments, because there were over 100 comments from the public in the previous plan, and in the plan one before. But in the previous plan, the 2021 regional water plan, we had fewer than 10 public comments from the public. And so just because there may not be a need that you all see right now to make substantive revisions to the guiding principles, that does not bar you from choosing to make revisions to that going forward, should the need present itself.
The only comment I have is, this isn't good, but honest. The only comment I have is, where you have adopted August 4, 2016, should you also add revised, whatever day you revise it, just so we can keep some history or something? So, I guess.
Perspective.
Yeah, perspective, because it says adopted, you can change from 2016 to 2021. So if you just add that, it'll be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next step would be to actually make these changes in the Word document of the guiding principles themselves, as opposed to just on a PowerPoint, and circulate them. And then we will definitely make sure that it says updated or revised in the date.
Okay, Tim, with your comments, would you be willing to put that in the form of a motion?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I move to amend Principle 1 and Principle 11 of the Guiding Principles of the Planning Group as described in the presentation provided by our technical consultant to update the references to previous plans and to previous plans.
Lord will second it.
Okay, we have a motion by Tim Andrews and a second by Glenn Ward and Paul Taggart. Is there any, we'll try to do this by consensus, is there anyone opposed to making these non-substantive changes to the guiding principles? If you're on your computer and you've got a concern, now's the time to speak up. Seeing none and hearing none, we will adopt the changes to the guiding principles.
Is it all right to move on to agenda item 9?
All right, agenda item 9, overview of the and discussion of the cycle timetable for the next consulting for the consultants.
Yes, sir. So I first wanted to start off with identifying the release dates of data that we will be receiving from the Texas Water Development Board. As Katie Dahlberg mentioned, the draft demand projections for livestock, manufacturing, and steam electric power were released this past month, January 2022. And the next due date, essentially, for the Regional Water Planning Group is to review those draft projections and request revisions and finalize adjustments with Texas Water Development Board staff by July of 2023. So a year and a handful of months from now. The next data release is in March. It's expected to be in March of this year. And that will include the municipal water user group list. So looking at the WUGs that were identified previously and identifying whether or not there are new WUGs. Looking at historical water use data, including GPCE data, historical population, and other water use. And the deadline for that one, I've highlighted in yellow here because it's a bit sooner. The deadline to provide feedback to the Texas Water Development Board is July of this year. So that means we will get this data in March of this year, and we will need to have feedback provided back to the Texas Water Development Board sometime in July. So we'll have a fairly short time frame for getting that feedback back to the Texas Water Development Board. The next data release is September of 2022, and as Katie mentioned, that will be the irrigation and mining demand projections, draft projections. And in February of 2023, they anticipate releasing the population projections and draft municipal demand projections. And then the due dates for actually providing comments and feedback back to the Texas Water Development Board and adjustments are in 2023. And so I put this into a conceptual schedule with the Texas Water Development Board's data releases in green, as green flags across the top, and then other deadlines associated with the technical memorandum, which is due March of 2024, the final or the initially prepared plan in March of 2025, and the final plan due in October of 2025. So kind of taking a look at this from a holistic, zoomed out view, then zooming in and kind of understanding what we have going on for this year. So this is the anticipated 2022 schedule, and these are only showing the scope of work items for which we currently have a contract. So as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, we will be expecting an amendment to our scope of work sometime this summer, and so there will be additional tasks included in that scope of work. So for the purposes of this schedule, we're only including what we know for sure that we are scoped to do. And so that's task 1, the planning area description, task 2A, the non-municipal water demand projections, task 2B, population municipal demand projections, task 8, unique segments and policy recommendations, and task 10, which as we know is integral to just the original planning process as a whole, and so it spans along the entire length of the planning cycle. So as I mentioned, we received the data January of this year for the livestock manufacturing and steam electric power, and we will have through July of 2023 to get feedback and finalize adjustments there. For mining and irrigation, we'll get that data in the 3rd quarter of this year, and the deadline is in August 2023. For the WUG list, under task 2B, the WUG list, you can see historical population water use. We'll expect that next month. And so again, we will have a rather short time period to get data or feedback back to the Texas Water Development Board. Down at the bottom in this task 10, I've got shown there as orange diamonds when we're anticipated to have regional water planning group meetings. And so you can see between the green flag and the red flag, we have one meeting where we would have an opportunity to review any feedback that we've gotten on the WUG list, GCB, historical population, and water use data, and then agree to it here in a regional water planning group forum before providing that feedback back to the Texas Water Development Board. Does that all make sense? So I've kind of broken out what you can expect over the next year in terms of, at this point in time, this is what we're anticipating covering at each of these meetings. The first is, at the May meeting, we'll be reviewing in more detail the livestock manufacturing and steam electric demands that Katie briefly reviewed today. We will delve into more detail on the WUG list, GPCD, historical and population and water use data. And we'll need to provide revisions back by July of this year. And just to note, that might be a place where the Regional Water Planning Group may choose to develop a subcommittee, maybe to delve into more detail on the population water use demands, water demands. At the August Regional Water Planning Group meeting, I anticipate the topics would be continuing to cover the livestock manufacturing and steam electric demand projections. For the November meeting, same thing, adding in plus the mining and irrigation demands. And that concludes the schedule. And then after that, we can talk in more detail for the following agenda item on the subcommittee. Question.
I have a question, though. I have a question that's not so much about your schedule. It's more about the information we just saw with regards to manufacturing, or how it's been consistent, and then the next plan, I guess, projects, shoots straight up, and it says Bexar County, I think she said Calhoun County, Victoria County. Do you know what the causes of that is, or what's causing all that?
I wouldn't be able to answer that completely right now because we just got that data and I haven't delved into it, the manufacturing in excruciating detail. But that is definitely something that we can talk about either at the next meeting or at a potential subcommittee meeting. Unless Elizabeth.
This is Tim Andrus. I have a couple questions. If there was interest in forming some form of a work group to review projection data before the amendments that you anticipate receiving from TWDB to your contract in the summer, would Black and Beach be able to assist that work group or work groups with their work to review and consider and possibly make comments on those projection data?
Yes, sir. In my mind, it's all included under Task 10, which is public participation.
Okay. And given the short timeline to provide feedback to TWDB on the WUG list, et cetera, you anticipate you'd have time to support a work group in that interim period from March to the May meeting of the Regional Planning Group?
I do. So if we were to form a work group to specifically delve into more detail on the WUG list and GPCD and historical population and water use data, and convene and have meetings, one or more meetings before that May RWPG meeting to be able to provide either recommendations or guidance on how to proceed or what feedback to provide back to the Texas Water Development Board, that I think that's what would make most sense.
Okay. Thank you.
And if you all want to continue to think about that, and if you're ready to go to the next agenda item,
We'll go ahead and agenda item 10.
then we can talk a little bit about the subcommittees. So we had presented this graphic in our presentation and interview to you all back in September that historically Janelle has established work groups to continue to enhance stakeholder involvement and engagement, to really delve into those details and tackle complex technical subjects. And they've just generally been for topics of significance to you all, the Regional Water Planning Group members. And so potential stakeholder or potential work groups or subcommittees that you may want to consider might include population water demand projections, environmental, effluent, modeling and reuse, and others. So one of the things I did was look back at the previous plan to see what have we done in the past. In the 2021 plan development, there were, as from what I can tell, 6 or 7 work groups, and I've gone ahead and I've identified the month and the year that they were initiated. There may have been several meetings. For example, environmental assessment had many meetings associated with it, but I think innovative strategies only had 1. and also major water providers only had one. And so I've also identified generally the responsibilities of each work group. And so previously there was the environmental assessment, which was really aimed more at how to review water management strategies from the environmental assessment methodology. And it also looked at Chapter 6 and how the impacts to instream effects and freshwater inflows were impacted by water management strategies in the plan as a whole. There was also a work group on minimum standards, and from what I can tell, that was establishing minimum standards for recommendation of water management strategies and also management supply. And both of those ended up going into the guiding principles. So if there were guiding principles that you all wish to revise, one potential option is to create a work group or a subcommittee to delve into detail and suggest potential language revisions or additions. Similarly, there was one on innovative strategies, establishing the extent to which innovative strategies should be used, such as rainwater harvesting, cloud seeding, and desalination. There was one on major water providers. So major water providers was a requirement, a new requirement in the previous plan, and this go around, I don't really anticipate us needing to develop a work group aimed at major water providers, because I think we probably get the gist now, and we can probably tackle that here in this meeting as opposed to breaking off and delving into a lot more detail. Effluent modeling and reuse was developed. There was at least one meeting, there may have been a handful, maybe two, to consider hydrologic variances and the role of reuse within the regional water plan. And then there was the policy recommendations, and this is mainly for developing language for Chapter 8. And that one had several meetings, and those were mainly aimed at the latter portion of the regional water planning process. So I don't anticipate that one really coming into play until for a few more years. And then of course we have the staff work group, which meets 2 weeks before, about roughly 2 weeks before each regional water planning group is sort of a dress rehearsal for this meeting. Are there any questions about the past work groups? Okay, I took a stab at identifying potential future work groups, but this is by no means a proposal or recommendation or suggestion on my part, because this plan is your plan. This is what you, the Regional Water Planning Group members, choose to make of it. But I went through and I identified some potential work groups if you want to continue with what we had previously. So that could include the environmental assessment work group to, again, just review the water management strategy evaluations or whatever charges you all would want. You may want to look again at the minimum standards. If not, that's your plan. Yeah. The next one is the innovative strategies. I've gone in and I put month and year to start date, and those are, again, are just, I basically looked at the previous planning cycle and added 5 years to it and then adjusted it for when I think we will probably tackle particular subjects. The next is the effluent modeling and reuse. That one I think will probably come into play a lot sooner because we'll need to be evaluating existing water supplies probably towards the latter part of this year. So understanding and identifying those hydrologic variances will be important sooner rather than later. Policy recommendations, again, I don't think that'll come into play until later in the planning cycle, so July 2024. Staff work group, that's already done. And there are 2 new work groups that may be of interest to you all and may be beneficial. One is the population and water demands work group. And this is what we've talked about a couple of times during this meeting so far, to basically review the data releases from the Texas Water Development Board and delve into the data in a bit more detail to be able to develop feedback to the Texas Water Development Board to make those adjustments. And it would also provide opportunities for stakeholder engagement, targeting various areas. And this is where I definitely want you all to provide feedback and input on what direction you want this plan go in, because, I mean, I've looked at this, and I've identified a couple of unique challenges that I think that we could tackle for this cycle, and one of which is the high growth along the I-35 corridor, and needing to get more stakeholder input along that I-35 corridor to make sure that water user groups are providing us the most accurate data about water management strategies and their water use data and so forth. And then the second unique challenge that we've identified is how to improve the unmet needs that are identified in the regional water plan for irrigation. I think there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 115,000 acre feet of unmet needs in the 2021 plan for irrigation. And that is in 15 of the 21 counties in Region L. However, the vast majority of the volume of the unmet needs for irrigation are primarily in the Nueces River Basin. And so I think developing an irrigation water management strategies work group could be helpful to really engage stakeholders in rural areas of Region L, bring them together, provide opportunities for water user groups to collaborate on potential water management strategies, provide opportunities for feedback on livestock and irrigation and manufacturing water demands, and hopefully to develop water management strategies that can address the unmet needs that we have had for each planning cycle for the last several planning cycles at least. Those are just some ideas, and again, this is your plan, and I want you all to be able to steer this however you wish.
Any comments from the
Chairman Middleton, this is Tim Andrews again. One, I'd like to thank Lauren for putting that together for us. It's very helpful. I particularly like your efforts to look to the future and give us some sense for the types of work groups we may want to consider developing. But at least from my view, there's a pressing matter, and that's the review of the WUG data, et cetera, and the need to develop any proposed comments and requests for revision for TWDB in a timely manner. I think it'd be appropriate for us to determine, is there interest by membership of the planning group to participate in a work group to review that data for the purposes of developing potential comments and requests for revision. And if there is, then I suggest perhaps we establish that work group for that purpose, with the understanding that they would work to develop those comments and suggested revisions for presentation to the planning group at our May meeting, so that the committee might have the opportunity to take action on that recommendation. If there were a recommendation, take action on it and present it to TWDB.
I agree with Roberto. I have a lot of questions about those projections. We get a dialogue on why the change, why the slopes they picked. I think that would be a worthy work group.
Okay, we've got several members in here nodding their head yes, that they'd like to see that work group established. I can't see y'all, so speak up if you have a comment you'd like to make about it. If not, we're going to proceed on with establishing, or at least asking the committee to think about what's required here. This is February. We need to get this work group up and running and try to meet with Lauren and the consultants in the next 2 months, so that we have an opportunity to bring back to the planning commission, to the planning group rather, not commission, board, in May, questions and or explanation. We've got time to seek it from TWDB to get back to us. We understand what's caused some of these projections to be what they currently are, and better understand it and report back to the planning group then in the May meeting, which gives us time then to respond back to TWPG by the deadline. So, I'm asking for volunteers at this point. Tim, would you like to kind of?
This is Tim Andrews. I'll be willing to serve on that committee.
Okay.
I'd like to serve.
Humberto. Read your name.
Steve Grant.
Yeah, Steve Grant.
Steve Grant.
Okay. That's, 4 of you. Any more?
From GBRA, please.
Okay. That's 5. 5 sounds like a good round number. Going once, going twice sold. We'll let Lauren, have the opportunity to discuss some timetables with Tim when you guys can meet, and she will be getting back to each of you individually to try to coordinate that.
Right, and I believe it's subject to open meetings act too, so.
Yes, I will organize meetings and contact you all individually so that we can set dates.
And so, do you all have an idea of whether or not you would want to have some sort of stakeholder outreach initiative to target any particular areas associated with the population and water demands work group?
I would say that that's a positive direction we need to take. I believe the gentleman who just joined this group, he couldn't come in today. He had a lot of good ideas. I forget his name, I apologize.
Travis Christie.
But he had a lot of good ideas. So I think it's imperative that we do as much as we can to reach the public and outreach and try to get as much information on some of these ones. Canyon Regional occupies a lot of 35, but there are some areas that we're not a part of, so we keep doing what we can. But I think it's the right move to do some outreach for the ones.
Are you proposing an outreach committee?
No, I think that the outreach would just be I guess it could be a charge or responsibility of the population and water demands work group, just to make sure that we are getting the best, most accurate information from stakeholders. Because a lot of them don't necessarily know that this is a group and what you're charged with, and are charged with, and what the goals of this are. So I think having an opportunity to really reach out to various stakeholders would be helpful. I did reach out to Travis Christie to get some ideas from him about how we can better engage particular groups that have been historically maybe underrepresented or not as active in the regional water planning process. And he pointed out the rural, and I don't know, is Travis on the call?
Yeah, I'm on the call.
I don't want to speak for you, Travis, but you and I did discuss the rural communities, and you had some ideas. Did you want to talk about those?
Yes. In part of the regional flood planning group that we're political sponsor for Region 13, what worked out really well is we did what we called workshops, but they were like individually road shows, where we actually broke the whole territory into 4 different categories, and we kind of went to them. We had a meeting out in Cotulla, we had one in Lakey, one down in Tilden, where we kind of spread out to really kind of go to their territories to talk to these smaller municipalities, water districts, county judges, and those types of things. And we had just a wonderful turnout, and they really appreciated that, we came out to them, and it was, so valuable for us to get started on our flood planning, and I think it's a perfect opportunity to do the same thing in the water planning.
And a very helpful component of this is that with the regional flood planning, the public relations consultant that is helping with that in doing those roadshows is also our public relations consultant, Waterline PR. So it will be a similar effort. She's already got contact information for various entities, and it will just be a pivot and expand in different ways, if that's what the language is to do.
This is Humberto Ramos. I have another comment on these other groups. I think what would be helpful to me is, for instance, environmental assessment work group. I believe there was a group formed, and I guess I would rely on that group to tell us if we need to reform. And I believe we had a chair and we had some staff members, or I'm not staff, but high members. What would be helpful to me is to identify who was involved in that group and maybe let them take the lead and say, yes, we need to readdress this. Because again, we're relying on them, since I was a part of it, to give me feedback and let me know, yes, this is going to be something that we need to address, or we're looking forward to it, or not. So I would hold that for environmental assessment, minimum standards, better strategies, and those others, just to see who was involved. And if there's some reasoning they need to reform, or logic. I know Mr. Seaver was instrumental in environmental assessments, right, Mr. Seaver? Yeah, so I would rely on him to say if this is, or his group, or whoever was involved. That's what that is.
Would you want that discussion now, today, or?
I don't know if we have enough people. I don't even know who was, I know Mr. Seaver just particular for this one. And I don't know who else was involved with them. I certainly want to leave somebody out if they're not here, but again, I think at some point this discussion is bubbling up from that group saying, yes, majority of us are still here, and we feel this is paramount for us to move forward, and we need to regroup. I would rely on them until that, until we need that.
I think Mrs. Watson might have been involved with that too, and also was, because she was actually represented in her category of environmental.
Diane should be on the call.
Diane,
I'm on the call, but I cannot hear what these gentlemen are saying.
Okay, so Umberto said that he would defer to the planning group members who were previously involved and engaged with the work groups, such as the environmental assessment work group, to provide some input as to whether or not reforming that work group is necessary for the 2026 regional water plan. And they identified you and Mr. Siebert and I think Juliana as members who were heavily involved in the environmental assessment work group previously. Do you have any thoughts on reforming or the need to reform for this regional water planning cycle?
Well, my thought is that I was representing the public, not the environment necessarily, but I was outnumbered pretty much on that committee by those who felt that we did not need to make major changes in how we did the environmental assessment. And I don't think that that will have changed in this cycle. So I really personally don't think there is anything to be gained by reforming and reassessing what we do. But I'm open to the two environmental representatives on Region L if they might have different opinions or if they want to get together just to discuss it.
Do we have any environmental representatives on the call?
Vanessa's on the call.
This is Vanessa Quig-Williams. I'm happy to discuss it further with you, Diane. I mean, obviously I wasn't on the planning group last round, so wasn't a part of those conversations, and I'm not entirely sure like what is involved in being a member of the work group, but I'm interested in learning more, and if we determine that we want to move forward with it, then I would be interested in serving on that. And I think Charlie Flatten is also an environmental member as well, stakeholder as well.
I seem to remember that Charlie was on that committee last time.
Yes, I'm here, and I would be happy to at least have some formative discussions and or serve on the committee if it's formed.
Is that an action that you all want to take now, or is that something you want to continue discussing at the next meeting?
I think we would continue discussions, but I guess the point of it was to engage those people who were active in this community. prior to, to work groups to determine whether there's a need, and they'd be the better one served to tell us if there's a need or not. Because some of us, I don't want to say disengage, but some of us are dealing with other issues on this planet. So it's pretty well, I guess.
And again, I think that the environmental assessment work group was established because there was a need identified in the previous round of planning, that we had received many comments from the public regarding environmental assessments. And I think that the Regional Water Planning Group chose to develop this environmental assessment work group to address some of those issues and really expanded upon the scope and even the depth of those evaluations of each water management strategy. And so should the planning group choose to, or the work group see that as a need of needing to retool how the methodology for assessing water management strategies is done, then that might be something I'll choose to do.
Yes.
I could make one comment. I think that's a great point that you make, Lauren. I mean, a lot of these work groups came about because of developments during the planning process that weren't foreseen in advance of that. Someone would submit a new water management strategy or a modification to one, or something changed that created an issue in relation to the planning cycle and how we were dealing with a given topic at a point in time. I know that certainly was how we came about the work group on minimum standards. It was because of submittals that called into question whether we had the correct approach on that at that point in time. So I think that in relation to the timeline and the month and year table or start date here in relation to this column you have, I think is important to us to keep an eye on. I think obviously population and water demands work group being closest here in terms of the date we would need to work. But to tell you the truth, in relation to some of these, I'm not sure we can adequately determine whether it makes sense to form a work group or continue an existing work group until we to some extent have some of the inputs into this process and we see how they affect overall, how we're sitting in relation to being prepared to answer some of those questions or for the group to act on them. So I think you make a great point there about how some of these originate and why, and how it would affect whether we, take an action now or later to form work groups. We can form work groups throughout the entire cycle, correct?
Exactly.
I think that's probably the most sensible approach if we see the actual need in relation to what Roberto's saying.
And if you like, it can just be a sort of stating action item of mine to identify if there's a topic of particular depth that may need some additional eyes on it, and I can throw that out at meetings.
I agree with that approach. I think that's a good approach, with the exception of the irrigation needs that we have throughout the region. This is something that's very real to us over in the west. We've got quite a bit of a deficit there in the irrigators, and I would want to make sure that we would form some kind of committee with that to place further emphasis on that and hopefully get that addressed this time. It's my understanding it's been several cycles that has not been done, not just the last one.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that would be my only caveat.
Mr. Chair, it could be a standing item that we revisit. Is there a need for a new work group? Just as Tom has described. I agree, probably for now, just the population projections.
Fine with me. I think that we'll, the work group that got established today to move forward with what we're doing because of the time constraints put on getting back to TWPPB on the population numbers or demand numbers. But I mean, I think we ought to reach back and find out who was on these subcommittees or these work committees and make them aware through an email or something that we may need to reestablish something along those similar lines, or other subjects could come up, and find out who's willing and would like to serve on some of these different. Everyone has an interest group, so until we know what's coming down the pike, it's hard to appoint a committee to do something that they may not even care about. So, we'll postpone forming any more committees and just leave it open, where it could maybe be an open agenda item, so we can take action in the at least near future, May, September, agendas.
This is Adam Yablonsky. I just also wanted to provide support for the irrigation work group. I think that's an issue that we know is an issue now. It may not be as pressing on our timeline as the WUG work group. We may not have to do it, today, but I think that's something that we know we need. It's been a glaring issue, and at least the last two plans we've had unmet irrigation needs. And I think with Black and Beach having some expertise on board that they presented in their pitch to us, as well as some potential methodologies for moving that group forward, I think that's something I would support moving forward with sooner rather than later.
I would recommend, Adam, that you and others from the irrigation community reach out to each other on other board members and find out who might be willing to serve on that, and maybe come forward with you in the main meeting and say, hey, here's some guidelines that we could look at and let the committee get together and decide.
Sounds like a plan.
And that concludes the question
All right, thank you, Lauren. That brings us down to agenda item number 11, which is election of officers for the 2022 South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group Executive Committee. The bylaws state that we have to elect these executive committee members each year, so they're only serving a one-year term, and today is the first meeting of 2022, so we need to vote on them. You can make nominations from the floor. The vote will be held by consensus if possible, and the current officers include Kim Andrews as chair, vice chair is Adam Yablonsky, secretary Gary Middleton, executive at large include Roberto Ramos and Lynn Lloyd.
Chair, as we move to this agenda item, I'd like to remind all planning group members that they must have their cameras on, especially as we move to take action on this item. And I would like to add that there are no term limits. So although you serve 1 year at a time, there are no term limits that state that you cannot continue to serve.
Mr. Middleton?
Yes, sir.
If you don't mind, what she said is very important, otherwise, so they need to turn on their cameras, and everything, you have to count them, right?
Yes,
To make sure that we have a quorum under the law.
Be sure you have your cameras. Y'all need to turn your cameras on.
Must have them on.
We're very curious why you don't.
Please.
Sir, we do have a quorum on cameras.
We have a quorum?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
We have a quorum of voting members who are present, and we can see them and they can see us.
Just a question, Mr. Chairman, are the existing officers willing to serve an additional term, and so the will of the group?
I am.
I believe we had a meeting, we had a discussion at the staff work group meeting that came up with everybody.
Kind of saying that, I think, for the benefit of everybody, it wasn't a staff work group. But, yes, in the event that's the case, I certainly would nominate and suggest that we elect the current officers to serve an additional term for 1 year.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second to reappoint the current executive committee. There are nominations obviously can be made from the floor. Anyone else?
John,
And John Byron to
the list you're talking about?
to the executive committee?
Yes,
So he would be, what category would you like him?
any category you want. I just like to see somebody on the western side.
Why doesn't somebody tell us what that rule is? In other words, you have to put in the category. And I don't know if they know.
Well, the full slate of current officers have been, we have a nomination for them and a second. So if you want him to serve in one of these roles, one of these categories, you've got chair, vice chair, secretary, and executive at large. And there's two members there, Humberto and Glenn Lord.
Okay, executive at large.
Okay?
Don't you already have people in one position? So you're suggesting?
Sorry, I missed that, Chair. This is Glenn Lord. Sorry, I missed that, but I will say that I appreciated the opportunity to serve on the executive committee, but I don't want to stand in the way of anyone who wants to serve in that role. More than willing to serve next year, but if there's somebody else who wants to step up and enjoy the experience, I won't interfere.
Well, you have a motion and a second. So I would ask that we vote.
Before we, I guess, vote, it's a little hard to hear what y'all are saying. Some people are further away from the mic, but if we're going to change up some of the roles, can we get a listing of what categories or interest groups the current execs represent?
Jonathan, I don't think we're doing what you just mentioned. So it's
okay.
The current slate as it is now, there was a motion and a second. And
okay.
I think, Chairman Middleton now is going to ask for a vote, correct?
Correct. We have a motion on the floor with a second to re-elect the current and standing executive committee as listed on your agenda. Any objections? Anyone from the remote community object? If not, they're appointed by consensus. Now, let me ask a question. Is the executive committee by our charter, or can it be expanded, or does it have to be, it's just a total of 5?
Yes, sir, it's stated in the bylaws, it must be composed of 5 members.
Okay. All right. That concludes the action on agenda item 11. We'll go to agenda item 12. Schedule potential items for the next meeting, which will be on May the 5th of 2022.
I guess we have a recap of this work group. Should have some kind of recap. Update. Report back from the work group. Yeah, report back from the work group.
And also obviously the need at the May meeting to go ahead and try to appoint a subcommittee for ag or irrigation review.
Be a standing item, come back every week, right?
Yeah, but let's go ahead and put it on the agenda now so that the consultant knows we'll be talking about doing it at the next meeting. Any other items? Okay. Any public comment? We received nothing from the audience during the meeting. Any comment from anyone attending via the electronic or teleconference? All right, if not, the meeting adjourned.
Can I get a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
Motion and second to adjourn. Seeing no objections, we're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
You know,